The next guest today is Frэнsис Petit. He's representing USA Today, Associate Dean for Global Initiatives and Partnerships, Adjunct Associate Professor of Marketing Program Management for Executive MBA, MS programs, Fordham University at Gabelli School of Business in New York. So Frэнsис is going to talk on COVID-19's impact on the US and New York economies, US government response to COVID-19 and political landscape, potential short-term and long-term response to COVID-19 for businesses. Frэнsис, welcome. We are ready to welcome you here, and that's a great honor.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I know it's late for many of you, so we could also make this interactive with questions and just talk a little about what's going on in the United States. And I think first and foremost, the big lesson here is uncertainty abounds. If you look at the economy back in October, November, and you compare to where we are now, obviously, and the economy has since somewhat rebounded. But, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is 3,000 points behind since December. Over the past month, we've lost 30 million jobs in the United States. This Friday, tomorrow, the jobs reports comes out, which everyone's anticipating doom and gloom, up to maybe 16% to 20% unemployment in the United States. So uncertainty, nothing is certain, and who would ever thought this would transpire 4 months ago? But in terms of, the United States, in terms of deaths, basically we have about 30% of all deaths within the world as a result of the virus, and about 33% of all cases worldwide. And even in New York within the United States has about 30% of deaths within the United States. So this is the reality, and everything kind of, at least in New York, a standstill since March 11th. But questions have arisen just from the political landscape in terms of what are the state officials responsible for doing, and what is the federal government responsible for, and whose funds should be used. For example, crisis with ventilators. How many ventilators we will need? Who's responsible for obtaining those ventilators? So basically, politically, there are two factions, and the United States is very polarized politically. We have the left, which believes the world is coming to an end, and we have the right, as this was kind of advancing throughout the Western world, the Eastern world. Sorry, the right believes that this is some kind of media ploy to take them down. But our president and our government did respond with about a month and a half ago with the CARES Act, which means the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security Act, and it's a plus $2 trillion US dollar stimulus, and the U.S. government is anticipating adding another $3 trillion to its overall debt to make its debt close to $30 trillion. This is the largest stimulus package ever, and 5 times more than was used in the 2008 financial crisis. The CARES Act has multiple facets, and the idea is to keep money flowing into the economy. Keep money flowing into the economy. The first thing about it is, as Sergey mentioned, is the stimulus checks. And if you qualify, you will receive a one-time stimulus check from the government. So in terms of some of the rates, if you're single and you make $75,000 US dollars or less, you will receive a $1,200 stimulus check from the government. If you make $95,000 and you're single, $95,000 US dollars, you'll receive about $200 US dollars as a check. And the rates vary. For example, if you're married, if you make $150,000 US dollars as a married couple, your rate's about $100 in terms of your check. So this is the first thing, to receive one specific one-time payment and check. But in addition, the second facet, what the U.S. government has done is to extend unemployment benefits for 13 weeks. So traditionally, it's 26 weeks that you receive unemployment benefits, but they extended the 13 weeks to 39 weeks. And in addition, in terms of, and this was a big issue when they were putting together the CARES Act, another facet of unemployment is everyone will receive a $660 bonus check per week. So in addition to your unemployment benefits, you receive another $660 bonus check per week. And up to this goes to about July 30th. The third thing that was done was the income tax deadline was extended from April 15th to July 15th. And there's a few more things. The Paycheck Protection Program, the PPD, which is based on giving loans to small businesses up to $10 million. And it's two times their average payroll costs. And the idea is that 8 weeks of your payroll costs could be forgiven within the loans. The next item was the economic injury disaster loans, which again, loans to businesses and nonprofits at a very low rate. Also occurring is the rent mortgage relief payment program, which you can, if you have a federally backed mortgage, such as from Fannie Mae, et cetera, you can receive mortgage forgiveness for 180 days. But in order to qualify, you have to have lost your job as a result of COVID-19. Other initiatives, paid sick leave, student loan relief, cashing in your retirement annuity penalty-free, employee retention tax credit for organizations, food bank support, hospital assistance, and health insurance support. So this is just some things that the U.S. government is doing in the CARES Act. The question is, can it allow for money to continue to flow into the economy? And that's the goal. Interestingly, various states are taking a different approach in the United States in terms of when do we open business, when do we start going back to normal. And when you look at it, the idea here is this occurs, some things impacting this decision is the political leaders in the state, if there are elections coming up. If there are elections coming up in November, they'll be, they want to open up more quickly, even though it may cost lives. They want to open up more quickly. And this is all the way from the top, from our president. There's an election coming up in November. And within the United States, basically how it kind of works is, while some people might not agree with our president's behavior, they'll look at their 401k, and if it's in a positive state, they'll disregard the behavior and accept the behavior and vote that way. So I think that's kind of impacting the state's decisions to reopen. And this even, and so some medical experts are saying this, if we reopen too soon, the curve will go back up. Bill Gates interestingly mentioned that not just in the United States, but worldwide, there should be a cohesive plan on how we move forward. And one suggestion was, for at least 3 months or longer, we should basically not do anything. Have everything on standstill for an extended period of time, and then open up and come back. So in the United States overall, the Senate is in session, but the House is not in session. The House is expected to come back next week. And what we're seeing is, in some big cities, the curve is going down, but in some rural areas, the curve is going up in terms of cases. But overall, how it's going to impact the economy and moving forward, certainly with medicine. One thing is this concept of medicine, telemedicine. We see that as a result of COVID-19, trips to the emergency room have declined. They're saying people are being recommended not to go to the emergency room. Elective procedures, and elective procedures is where hospitals really make their margin with elective procedures. They are almost non-existent now. So that's directly impacting the healthcare industry. Also litigation. You're a frontline employee. You're going, you're working, you get sick. So there's going to be a lot of, we're a very litigious society, and we expect a lot of issues. So with all this as a background, the idea is, what should the business response be? What should the CEO, what should he or she do to move forward? And one thing that's prevalent in the West in how business is done, it's very prevalent, is there's a very short-term mentality. What guides a lot of decisions is the quarterly dividend. And this is unfortunate. I wish the long-term approach for innovation, the long-term approach isn't necessarily taken. A lot of these decisions are short-term, and in how we move forward. So, throughout the history of the stock exchange, the history through all these measurements, there's always been a high, and there's been a low, and it's always rebounded, right? So we have to take the long-term approach on will it rebound, and what should the CEO do? So I think just a couple of points. Number one is I think the CEO, they must be very transparent to their stakeholders in terms of where we are and this is what we have to go through and what's the plan. There's an unfortunate thing because of this short-term thinking. A lot of organizations, especially in the West, are under immense pressure to grow. And this comes from the top. This comes from their corporate directors. They put immense pressure to the CEO that we have to grow. If we're not growing, something is wrong. So a lot of these CEOs feel they must grow, and they must grow now. And the life of a CEO, especially for an international global organization, the life of the CEO is less than 5 years. And he or she will not necessarily take risks. For example, the risk could be launching a new product to a new market, right? They won't necessarily take a risk because they don't want a failure. They're afraid to fail. So the idea of the CEO must be very honest and transparent to their stakeholders. The CEO certainly has to look at their value chain. And now more than ever, they have to look at their value chain to see how can we serve the value chain. Because again, these relationships aren't just short term. In order for this to work, in order to have long-term sustainability, there's going to be highs and lows, but the value chain has to work together. The CEO must be a voice of reason among the organization, because the uncertainty leads to a lot of pressure. And then I think the CEO has to look at what are your value drivers? What will your value drivers be in the short term? And what will your value drivers be in the long term? Is there any horizontal opportunities that result from COVID-19? So obviously you see things like GE and other organizations looking to get in the ventilator business, looking to do this short term. What can we do short term in terms of our value drivers, and what can we do long term? And I guess, how do you prioritize those things? But in addition, I just think that now more than ever, international institutions, major companies in the United States, et cetera, look, they're going to be watched. They're going to be looked at how they handle the crisis. Especially now, like, my generation, whether it's the baby boomer generation or Generation X, especially Generation X, we're very cynical. We're very cynical. We're in theory, we're considered the first generation that's been impacted by divorce. So we're very cynical. But then you have the millennials, Gen Z, right? And they want meaning from the brands that they consume. They want something that means more than just the product line, right? What does the brand stand for, right? So this is potentially an opportunity for organizations to really make a statement in terms of what the brand stands for. Okay. Now, mind you, there's pressure from corporate directors to grow. There's pressures for the quarterly dividend, right? But can you make a statement on this is what the brand stands for? For example, in the United States, obviously the world of sports is big, like it is worldwide. And the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, was almost the last organization to make a statement in terms of what they're going to do as a result of the virus, right? But the organization that led the way was the National Basketball Association. They were the first ones to step up and say, the rest of the season's canceled, it's canceled indefinitely, and they're leading the way in how they're approaching this, and other organizations are following. So I think it's very, very important to have really purposeful positioning. You're being watched, and it's going to be remembered. And the idea is, can we think less about the short-term financial metrics, and more about the long-term meaning of the brand? So the idea is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Are we measuring too much? It's very difficult to fully measure the impact of a happy customer. It's very difficult to measure the full impact of a dissatisfied customer, right? But how do we build this connection to the brand long term? So those are just some examples. I think maybe what the CEO should think of doing, he or she should think of doing, and realizing that short-term thinking can only take us so far here. And what can we do more long-term, and what can we do to impact those millennials who need to connect to the brand? So just kind of a little bit of some opening statements. I don't know if there's questions, but I just wanted to kind of start that as a position.
Thank you so much, Francis. Very interesting. We are making notes. Very deep talk. So we've got a question from our participant on the global issue, and I think then we're gonna get back to adding value. Okay. So first, let's refer to the question from our participant. I would like to hear answers to these questions, please. What do you see? What do you see as a potential outcome scenarios in this U.S.-China Cold War brewing? 8:15.
Well, I think obviously both countries are kind of calling each other's bluff, right? Both countries need each other, and both countries realize that. So I think in terms of the trade war, the idea is eventually both sides will, my personal opinion, because both countries need each other, there will be a period of both countries acquiescing and coming to some kind of agreements, right? But we have, certainly on the U.S. side, obviously there's a feeling that we are getting the wrong side and the wrong financial end of this deal, and So our president is making a statement. Now, there's arguments against that. So, but I think the bottom line is both countries realize they need each other. And at one point, at the right point, there'll be some type of agreement moving forward.
Thank you so much. We are moving on with our questions. So, are there any solutions, IT solutions, driven by government instead of private companies?
Well, I think obviously, I would say not really. So the one great thing about where we are now is technology, right? And it's because of technology we can acquire so much data, and most organizations, certainly private organizations, are sitting on so much data. And it also, if you historically look at it, it's all as a result of technology. It all, in the early 1980s, the metal, the strip where we could start collecting data. Organizations are collecting so much data, and most organizations in general aren't using all the data to its most effective means. However, the U.S. government is archaic. And when it comes to technology, et cetera, compared to some of these private companies, compared to what they can do, in terms of, not necessarily in terms of security and protection, but in terms of commerce, do I see a value add? Not as much as probably what is needed.
Thank you so much. We've got a question from Sergey.
Yes. Yeah, Francis, we see China being accused from some states, U.S. states, and do you think it's a part of a political fight in the U.S., or it's a real economic threat to China? And as a part of this question, but a second question, $3 more trillion being printed for debts, and $3 more trillion in debt for United States. There is no way to pay it back, or do you see the way to pay it
Sure.
back?
In terms of the debt, obviously, paying it back in the short term is not an option, and even in the long term, it'll just be repackaged. As you know, I think things to be getting so increasingly polarized in the United States, and the news media doesn't necessarily help. So the idea is, if I'm on the right, I go to certain news outlets. If I'm the left, I'm going to certain news outlets. And, each news outlet has its own agenda. And it's just, if I follow in Twitter, you follow what you like to read, right? So this thing is just creating such a more polarized society. And with that said, there is a strong feeling in the United States from one side, that this is all China's fault. There's a strong feeling from one side in the United States. They talk about, 4 or 5, from bird flu, et cetera, from all these different types of viruses, right? And there's a pointing fingers and there's a blame at China, right? This is one side, and this one side isn't open to any type of dialogue. And then there's another side that takes a different approach in terms of the events, right? And overall, partially it's, I think, in terms of our leader, we've never had this type of leader in terms of behavior in the White House. But some people say that he's not necessarily leading. he's not necessarily leading this movement. He's just a barometer of what people a certain part of the United States is thinking. And so, it's a scary time, because we've never been so polarized ever. So there is a group that truly believes and is truly angry at China, and this is fueled by what our commander-in-chief has also been saying. So overall, I don't know if I answered your question, but the idea is and this kind of idea, this notion of nationalism isn't just here. It's spreading all over.
No, Francis. Sorry, I'm not talking about nationalism or any other things to be connected to that. I'm just saying, do you think we're gonna face a new economic fight between U.S. China as we saw a few years ago? I mean, last year, the year before.
Okay,
that's primarily what the question is.
Yeah, I misinterpreted your question. Well, partially it's how things progress within the United States, and in terms of how the economy does progress. I think elections do things for politicians in terms of thinking about moving. And if it's our commander-in-chief's goal to be reelected, some people say he seems to be disinterested. But if it's our commander-in-chief's goal to be reelected, he will create a better perception of what the relationship is, as opposed to increasing the animosity and increasing the potential trade war, etc.
Thank you so much. Like, we are getting back to questions from our participants. So the question goes as follows. Is it worth to shut down the economy to save lives? Economists say each human life is worth about $10 million. So how did they measure this number?
Well, this is more of a philosophical debate, in that there are leaders that believe the people that are passing away, if their immune system's compromised, if they're aged, etc., reopening the economy is not necessarily a bad thing. And there's others that believe, no, this is not the case. So, I think you could make the argument, or these leaders are making the argument, that their side is reopening is the best for the United States, even if it costs lives. Again, I think there's strong opinions on both sides. Personally, I think our leaders are moving too quickly to reopen. And I think there's going to be another increased spike. And even even what our commander-in-chief says, he does now say, he does throw out these potential mortality rates to kind of create a ceiling, a very high ceiling. So it's very difficult. Personally, I think I'm more in kind of like the Bill Gates type of thought processes. I think shutting down for an extended period can only be positive in terms of saving lives.
Thank you so much. The question is coming up the third time. Do you think we'll see a decline of America?
I think there's been a little bit of a decline over time. So basically, last century, in terms of economics, China this century was what America was last century, right? Overall, there's been kind of we've lost somewhat of our position as kind of being the one and only top economy, et cetera. So there will be a decline for sure, and there will be, we'll see where the unemployment rate goes. It'll only get worse. It will only get worse. And, but like in anything, it'll take time to rebound. Now, will it rebound by fourth quarter? As, some politicians have been saying, no, it's going to take longer. This is more of a long-term, and this has, obviously huge impacts on everything. For example, even how higher education is consumed, right? And certainly private institutions in higher education who draw from a more, who draw from at least 50 states and draw internationally, they're at least in the short term, they're anticipating big drops in enrollment. They're anticipating also, more of a local, student body, because students don't necessarily want to travel across the country and then be in, online mode. So this is going to have a big impact on how business is conducted across all facets, and industries will have to learn the kind of this new paradigm. So it will certainly have a huge impact, a more longer impact than what's certain government officials are saying, and we will rebound, but the question is when.
Thank you so much. And coming back to adding value and new paradigm on private businesses, how do you see the development of small businesses, middle businesses in this regards?
Well, so the idea is to certainly take advantage of the relief package, right? At least to kind of add some liquidity and to kind of keep it moving. I think probably the smaller businesses have more agility to kind of pivot, and as opposed to a larger institution. But it's all from the top down. Like when you're in a small organization, obviously you wear multiple hats, and it's a more horizontal versus vertical institution. But smaller organization, mid-size, even a family type of organization, although there's always issues with family businesses. But overall, it has to come from the top, and the leader sets the tone. So the idea is, and if it's cascaded throughout the organization when it comes from the top, which is critical. And within a smaller organization, that's easy to do from a leadership point of view, from a CEO point of view. I think overall, one of the issues in business, and you can view this for better or worse, but one of the issues is the emerging importance of the CFO, right? And this is kind of like a 30-year phenomenon. And the CFO has moved from a service-oriented function to now a kind of a top function, and a lot of times the second most important person in the organization. The CFO has power. The CFO dictates strategy. And I think we have to take a step back and look to see, why did that occur? And, why should the CFO have so much power? And partly it's because the pressure from the board of directors, the pressure to grow. So I think the small organizations, the ones that don't necessarily are a public company, the ones that don't necessarily have to report earnings every 90 days, have a greater ability to kind of look more long-term and look to see how do we innovate? Because innovation, you can't innovate in a 90-day cycle. Innovation takes time, and innovation, there's failure, right? And no one wants to fail. It's such a conservative approach with some businesses because failure is not an option. So within the smaller businesses, if it's from the top and it's a more longer term view, and the leader allows for failure, because for every 3 ideas that fail, the fourth idea is gold. Then that's the way that, you know, new value can be created, and certainly we can pivot.
Thank you so much. We are moving on. How to gain markets for small business? How can we gain our markets back?
Well, you know, it's a hard question to answer, because obviously with disposable income, if this disposable income is you know, if in the short term there's a scarcity of disposable income, then obviously that has to be taken into consideration. And I think not only gaining markets, but you have to look at the importance of what is the importance of market share, and just, you know, as opposed to maybe looking at what markets can we most productively serve. So, like for example, organization. This is kind of one of the cardinal sins in pricing, in pricing products and services. If you look at market share, as a vehicle to price, versus looking at, you know, which market should we properly serve. For example, like the New York Yankees, right? Premium price product, the New York Yankees. If the New York Yankees, they're not operating at capacity for every game, right? I think they average like 41,000 for each game, and I think it's like a 62,000 seat stadium, right? They're not operating at capacity at games. Now, one strategy should be, well, you know, we have a premium price. Should the Yankees lower their price and gain market share from local minor league baseball teams, right? They're not major league baseball teams, they're minor league baseball teams, and take that market share away, right? And gain market. And the answer to that question from a pricing perspective is no, because the Yankees are a different product than a minor league baseball team, and they profitably serve a specific market. And to do that would be to devalue the brand, similar to Godiva trying to take market share from Russell Stover, right? So I think trying to gain market, I think the idea, you know, look at market share, but with, you know, skeptically, and more importantly, look at which markets we can most profitably serve.
Devaluing the brand.
And like, what does the brand stand for, right? So, you know, when you look at a brand, and the idea is, you know, the basic premise should be, when you look at the brand, just by looking at the logo, there has to be an instant connection and an instant feel, right? The brand should, and it's a targeted feel, right? You see the brand and you have to get a specific feeling, right? So how do you build that? And the problem is with branding, the problem is that one negative thing, you know, you take so long to build a brand, and it could be your personal brand too. You spend so long to build it, and then one specific bad service, one specific instant example can destroy years of building the brand. So, you know, that's part of it as well.
Too much. The question coming in this fact, what general foresight of human and the global participant? What's the general foresight for future consumption?
Well, I think obviously we are a society that consumes, right? We are a society that it leverages itself, and I think that will continue. We're not a society that in the United States that potentially sacrifices now for consumption later, right? We want things now. We want to consume now, right? And as opposed to, for example, our grandparents, right, who might have had a different approach. Nowadays, people want things now, and I think that will continue. The question is with the disposable income available. But I think consumption, there's a consumption mentality. Now, this is better or worse, like, and we see this in kind of, say, the pharmaceutical industry, right? We're consuming more. And instead of necessarily finding instead of necessarily looking to find the root of the problem, we consume more to treat the symptoms, right? And this is what society is. So instead, you have high cholesterol. Instead of kind of looking at the reasons why, maybe I should lose weight, maybe I should do this, we instantly grab a pill, right, as consumption. So I think the consumption mentality, compared to what our grandparents, their perspective, we will still consume, and continue to consume, and continue to leverage ourselves. So I don't think that will go away.
Thank you so much. Having question, and I think it's going to be the last question. So not to keep everybody long here. I know it's like very, very effective discussion. Will U.S. and Europe go on easing sanctions or restrictions towards Russia? What steps do you think?
So I think any chief executive officer under or a leader of a nation in all circumstances has to be a uniter, right? We have to be a uniter, and we have to have allies. And the president, because we have to have strategic alliances in order to move forward as a nation, but also to move forward internationally as a world. And that's not necessarily the view, or the view of our current chief executive. The view there is we are the greatest, and other countries, we have to be the greatest, and we have to win, right? So overall, my view is we need each other, and it could be a win in obviously, even with different views, we can establish some type of win-win among all nations in more of a cohesive way. So will sanctions be lifted overall? I think this is the impediment in terms of the belief that we have to win at all costs, whatever that means. And I think it can be unfortunate, because the idea is that there's a belief overall that the world revolves around us, right? The world, there's a certain segment in our country that believes the world revolves around us, and we are the center, right? And that's not necessarily the case from various points of view, from an innovation point of view, from an economic point of view, et cetera. And I think we have to understand that better, because we can win more by collaboration.
This is so true. And the very last question, just there's one more coming up and we're finishing, because I cannot leave this question. Do you really think the present challenges would alter too much the happiness index, quality of life ranking in the countries all over the world?
Well, I guess I'll speak from the United States perspective. Obviously we need to consume. I think there's will it affect the index? I think there's a population that can find happiness regardless of the circumstances, and there's a population that will not find happiness regardless of the circumstances. They'll find issues, etc. In the United States, there's people tend to be always thinking they don't have it great compared to their neighbor. We don't have as big a house. We don't have as nice of a kitchen. You know, there's always this need to want more, and a lot of it is material items. So overall, I think having a deeper understanding of yourself and having a deeper understanding of what's important to you, right, is critical to achieve happiness. So I think we're kind of going this other direction, that, you know, the more possessions, the more is status, and status is happiness, right? So I think those are kind of contributing factors overall. But, you know, obviously, while it's bad, and while people don't necessarily have less disposable income, this isn't like the Great Depression, right? A lot of people still have cable TV, and they're spending, and so it's bad, but, you know, there's been much worse times in our history.
Thank you so much. We're finishing up here at this session. We are like, we had a very absorbing session, I would say capturing. Thank you so much for this experience, Sergey and Francis. I think we should have one more session like that, because the questions are coming up, and that's a deep talk. That's a deep talk. That's an honor to have a session like that. Thank you so much for joining, and like, we're grateful for this chance and opportunity, and we're saying thank you to all the partners who could organize that chance for us to get in touch with such great experts.